Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present my poetry. Something to think about, something to take home. I'd love to have more discussion on it after. Thank you for coming. What do you want? What? We'll talk later. I'll tell you later. You'll be fine. All the other students are getting it. You'll be fine. I know what the answer is. Oh, no, I know what the answer is. Full access. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Yay! Next time, won't you sing with me? Ah, wonderful job! You know your ABCs. I'm so proud of you. Hey, what did Auntie say? What's so funny? Oh my goodness, your aunt just told her story about her dog. He got outside, just to go to the bathroom, his typical routine, and he was sniffing around the yard, and he saw some sort of animal over there. It stuck its tail up and sprayed. The poor puppy ran right back inside. Your aunt didn't have any idea. He came right in the house and stunk up everything. He was running around, jumping on furniture. It got the smell everywhere. Oh, we put him in the bathtub, and oh my goodness, we had to wash him so good with tomato sauce. It smelled so bad. We washed him down with shampoo. Oh, but he still smells. That's what was funny. Oh, a skunk? That's awful. I can't imagine. That is funny. Excuse me, I have a question. Of course. So A times B equals C, but I'm not really getting that formula. Do you mind explaining it again? Oh, absolutely. Graduation day. Oh, sweetie, we're so proud of you. You accomplished all that you wanted to and more. Us too, sweetie. We're so proud of you. RITNTID. College. Bye, Mom and Dad. I love you. We love you. Oh, I had to call home. Mom, I miss you so much. I really want to go home. I miss your cooking. I need to do laundry. I just miss you so much. I miss my brothers and sisters. Oh, honey, we miss you. We do. But Christmas is coming. You're going to have break and you will be home very soon. Keep working hard. You're going to be okay. Okay, I love you. Graduation day. What am I going to do next? Find a job. What's available online? Writing back and forth. Hey, could I have an interview? Wonderful. Thank you. I do. We're married. Baby on the way. Oh, thank goodness my husband uses my language. My baby uses my language. We are a full, complete family. Thank you. Thank you so much. We are starting the Lyceum at 11 o'clock, so we're going to have a short break. Thank you so much for being here for my poetry. I appreciate you.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
Yeah, would you announce your voice?
Sorry about that. Hello again. If everyone could tell their neighbors we're about to get started. I am a high school teacher, so bring those moose ears up. Let's go. Thank you for your attention. Before we get started at 11 o'clock, I'd love to dive in a little bit of the poetry that I just performed. There were two different stories at play here. My first experience that I showed you in my poetry does not happen to every deaf individual. Our community experiences things vastly different. Who their teachers are, who their families are, what their support system looks like may have been different than mine. The second part of my poetry was my personal experience. When I was found deaf at 14 months old, my parents recognized it and started signing. Visual communication has been in my life since I was very, very young. I had access to everything. So I really needed to show that parallel of what it looks like with or without access to communication. The jobs that we're able to attain, the careers that we pick. With language deprivation, our options are limited. With full access, we are successful, as everyone in this world can be successful in their own language. We find jobs, we get a great education, we have a family. So those two parallels were really important for me to express today. I hope you enjoyed it. We have about 6 minutes before 11, so let's see. Our next part is somewhat long, so everyone comfortable? Does anyone need the bathroom? Make sure you're good, and we'll get started in 5. Moose antlers. My inner teacher's coming out on a Sunday. My goodness. Put those antlers up. Let's go. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Cruz. I'm your moderator for this morning. Welcome to the Monadnock, what a word, Monadnock Summer Lyceum. If anyone's practicing their finger spelling in this room, that's a good one to start with. I'd love to introduce Dr. Laurie Shaffer. So for those who just got here, at 10:30 I performed some poetry related to a world without communication access for deaf folks and a world with communication access. So both of those parallels will tie in to what Laurie will bring to us this morning. We are so thankful for our sponsors of this event. Microspec, we are very thankful for the donation that they provided so that Laurie Shaffer could be with us today. The Lyceum has been going on for many, many years. Sponsors have been consistent, sponsoring this event once a month. We are so, so, so thankful. Today's lecture will be live streamed, available on the website. I do hope I spell it right. monadnocklyceum.org. There are retroactive videos there. You can go back and look at what's happened this year, previous years, and if you'd like to see this lecture again, please feel free to watch it online. Once Dr. Laurie Shaffer is done, we are going to have our question and answer session. There are those cards available. Does everyone have their yellow cards somewhere close to them? There they are. Wonderful, thank you. There will be someone who will collect those cards after the lecture, and we will have question and answer. So please, if anything is related to myself within the deaf community or the language I use, please feel free, or any questions for Laurie as well. Question from the audience. Would we like our questions to be signed or written? We would ask them to be written so that all cards can be collected. Thank you. For those who are watching on live stream right now, please add your questions to the chat. During the Monadnock Summer Series, there are donations that are asked of anyone who is willing and able. There is a basket towards the front door. To continue these summer series, we would love your donations if you are able. I appreciate all of your donations and appreciate your time in coming here this morning. Once we are done here today, we encourage you to write out some feedback for us. Does everyone have their green card? Wonderful. That is for feedback. We would love to know what you thought of today's series and how we can potentially plan for the future. Thank you. If you do fill out the green box, there is a glass container, let me see, right over here, the glass bowl up front. All feedback will be put there, please. I can't see it, there's a giant podium in the way, but I know it's over there. If you would like to add your email address to that green card, if you're interested in receiving more information about the summer series, you can sign up on that as well. If you'd like to visit the website and put your email address there or your mailing address, they will be able to send you information of future events. Once this event is completed, we invite you for a short 30-minute kind of snack and greet. Ask questions. I'd love to see your faces there for about a half hour. Perfect timing. Again, our speaker this morning is Dr. Laurie Shaffer. She has a lot of inspiring things to share with you today. I'm looking forward to it. How we as a community can improve and repave our way to equality and equity. We are so thankful as a deaf community as a whole to coordinate and collaborate with Laurie Shaffer. She has been here in New Hampshire for 5 years, and we have been really working together as a team to create more successful opportunities here in our state of New Hampshire. With Laurie here in our state, we have so many more resources. The improvement has been from her day one, so we are thankful that she's here. Her lecture is related to this side-by-side parallel, similar as I did with my poetry, and how having communication access leads to absolute success. Please welcome Laurie Shaffer. Keep cool, Laurie. I hope you're good.
Nicole's hanging out for a few minutes to take advantage of the fan. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming. And I better put on my reading glasses, else this could be a very short talk. It is a warm one, and so I especially appreciate you being willing to come out in this humidity and join with me, and I hope you will enjoy the talk today. To the members of the deaf community who are attending today, I'm so grateful you're here. It makes all the difference. I am presenting in spoken English, but know that I am truly honored by your presence. I'd also like to thank Eric Blackmere. Where is Eric? Eric, where are you? There he is. He's the man behind the curtain. He has a brilliant and open mind. He and I, over the years we've known each other, which hasn't actually been all that long, have had many conversations, and he's listened. It resulted in the invitation to come here today, and I'm very grateful for that. And I thank the Lyceum Committee for also staying open and to allowing new ideas and certainly a lot of new activity to take place in this space. And I thank my friend and colleague, Nicole Cruz, for joining me to share in today's event, bringing her talent and perspective as a person who lives proudly as a member of the deaf community. You've heard her introduction, but I'd like to share a little bit more. Nicole is a gift to New Hampshire, as are many of the deaf people in this room today. She's a teacher and shares her talent for just a few years, as she just started the job not too long ago, at Manchester's Memorial High School. She teaches American Sign Language, and in the few years she's been there, she's exponentially increased the number of students who are taking American Sign Language. She was just talking about that today to one of the people who have come to the talk, and I believe what I saw is that when she entered, there were 40 students taking the class. There are now 140 students taking the class, and there is a wait list. I'm excited to say that one of her students is joining UNH Manchester's College of Professional Studies to pursue their bachelor's degree in interpreting this fall. Collaboration with instructors like Nicole is invaluable. Interpreting programs need more students entering our programs who already have some familiarity with ASL and knowledge of the deaf culture and its community. It is the hope that these students will then acquire the skills and knowledge that will make them good at the work of interpreting, and perhaps address the national shortage in the numbers of qualified interpreters. But let's go back to Nicole for a moment. Nicole is also working to increase access to theatrical performances across the state, serving as an ASL language coach and consultant to interpreters. Coaches and consultants like Nicole work with interpreters like me translating scripts and lyrics from English to ASL. Her expertise greatly impacts the quality of the end product we as interpreters provide during the performance, giving deaf audience members a more robust and authentic sense of access. And that's not all she does. In her many roles and activities across New Hampshire, Nicole is a change maker. I am honored that she accepted my invitation to have a role in today's event. I thank her for her patience and her grace in the process. She helped me keep things real. So what does deaf mean to you, or to me, or to Nicole? Perhaps very different things. Back in September of 2023, I heard that the Peterborough Library Literary Book Club was scheduled to discuss a book called True Biz by Sarah Novick. By the way, the book is available at the Toadstool Bookstore. I was told to mention that. I had recently read the book and thought it was a work that well represented deaf people and their lived experience. I was also very curious as to what the book club would have to say. The readers who attended were very welcoming, and we had a great discussion. At one point, one of the attendees mentioned she'd taken an ASL class at a nearby town. I asked her if the teacher was deaf. She said yes. And I realized I hadn't asked the right question, because I was left not knowing if that instructor was audiologically deaf, or culturally and linguistically deaf, or both. If I'd asked the same question of a deaf person, is that instructor deaf? And the answer was yes, I actually would have had an answer. The instructor was culturally and linguistically deaf. We would have the answer because we shared the same frame of reference, the same construct to define deaf. How we individually or as a society frame deaf people impacts the forms of inclusion considered. It informs how the road is paved. I'd like to start first with sharing the road I took to being an interpreter. How does anyone prepare to be an interpreter? Presently, I teach students. The students I teach typically have one thing in common, and some of them are here today: passion. Something has planted a seed for them. Some have come from homes where a language other than English was spoken, and they're already bilinguals, and often have served as the ad hoc interpreter for the family. Some have one or both parents that are deaf. Many took ASL classes in high school on a lark and got hooked. They dream of interpreting on Broadway and for the UN. Over time, the students develop a second thing in common: perseverance. Many of the students at UNH Manchester's College of Professional Studies come with lessons already learned about perseverance. They face economic challenges. They are first-generation students facing the complexities of college. They have challenges at home. Choosing interpreting leads them to put their perseverance to the test. Interpreting is truly one of the most complex mental tasks a person can take on. And there's so much more to learn than language. If the students stick with the major, after the glitter fades and the reality sets in, when they realize they're working with real people in real life, they have managed to maintain their passion and their perseverance. For the past 35 years, I've worked as American Sign Language spoken English interpreter. When I was developing my skills as an interpreter, there were very few degree programs in interpreting. And it certainly was a unique career choice, given that I majored in fine arts in college, and I didn't start learning ASL until after graduation at age 22. So how did I evolve into an interpreter? In hindsight, I've come to see that some of my own seeds were planted early on. My dad was a graduate of Princeton. He was a successful professor of chemical engineering. and one of the early consultants on environmental compliance after the Environmental Protection Act passed. He was also hard of hearing, which was a significant factor in how he related to the world, to his family, to his friends. He did not use sign language, nor did he associate with deaf people. The frustration often led to anger, because what he had was a hearing loss. What he experienced was a disability. Conversations were difficult. In his older years, the hearing loss became worse, as did his moods. I suspect it was part of why he was forced into early retirement 2 years early. I often wish things had been different for him. From him, I learned that barriers to communication can have devastating effects. My mom was a bilingual in French and English. Her junior year at Mount Holyoke, she spent in Paris. She was always very proud of the fact that she could pass for Parisian. I was exposed to French from birth. I learned to be curious about other languages and cultures and people from her. All through elementary school, I was drawn to the Foreign Exchange Student of the Year. There was Nur from Turkey, Graziella from Italy, Kamala from India, Ingrid from Australia. Sure, Nur from Turkey. There was Graziella from Italy, Kamala from India, and then Ingrid from Australia. No problem. This is how we work. I loved learning about their lived experience and life worlds. I loved being their friend. Now, much to my mother's chagrin, I did not particularly like French and was not drawn to French culture, but it did put me on a path of language learning. In high school, I studied Latin, then Spanish. Mind you, I have no fluency in any of these languages. But the brain, when exposed to multiple languages, creates neural pathways that ease the way to further language acquisition. And it just so happens, American Sign Language has its roots in French Sign Language, which actually eased my way to understanding the syntax of ASL. That's a talk for another time. And let me remind you about that major in fine arts, a choice neither of my parents understood. But I am and always will be an artist. I see, observe, and compose visually. In a way, composing an artistic work is to take pieces and put them together in a way that makes visual sense. Through art, I have learned to connect understanding with seeing. Again, neural pathways formed young that help me to this day be the interpreter I am. Now, my first entry into the deaf world was not via a degree program. My first entry was at the New York State School for the Deaf in Rome, New York. My first ASL class I took from the superintendent's wife, Judy, who was deaf. I volunteered in the boys' dorm one night a week with 60 10 to 12-year-old boys and about a dozen dorm residential staff, all deaf. I would arrive and be greeted by one of the older boys named John Fanuff. He took it on to be my personal interpreter. He would come with me as I went from one boy's room to another, supposedly helping them with their homework. Needless to say, my competency in the language was lacking, and John would step in to assist. Judy, John, and all the deaf people I encountered at NYSSD began to shape my understanding of ASL and deaf culture. It would be at the next stage of my career that I would learn that I was capital H hearing. I went on to earn a master's degree in education of deaf children, and I was hired at the Learning Center for the Deaf in Framingham, Massachusetts. Until my time at the Learning Center, I had been gaining introductory knowledge of language and culture. Now I was going to learn much more. The broadening of my understanding came from many hours I spent with deaf students and faculty. There was the one student who came up to me at recess on a bright sunny afternoon. She tugged at my sleeve and said,
What does the sun sound like?
when I told her that from this distance, the sun was silent, she was skeptical. How could something so bright and so hot be silent? And that was the first moment I started to truly understand that I do not experience the world like deaf people do. My experience is not greater or better, but it's different. Also, while at the Learning Center, I learned about the oppression of deaf people that they experience at the hands of those of us that can hear. The denial of their existence as a linguistic and cultural minority. The insistence on repair and eradication rather than inclusion and respect. It was there I learned that capital D deaf was a cultural identity, and that lowercase d was hearing loss. I learned I was a member of the majority known as capital H hearing, and that hearing people don't always do right by deaf people, even with the best of intentions. I'm still learning how best to do right. After a few years at the Learning Center, I realized that I was more drawn to, and likely better at, interpreting than teaching young children. I took more classes, and after a few years, left to become an interpreter. Before leaving my teaching position, I sat for and passed the written and performance exams that will allow me to work in the state of Massachusetts. I had earned the equivalent of my driver's permit. Like a new driver, I needed supervision. I was hired as a staff interpreter at an agency that provided advocacy and support to people with disabilities. Within the agency, there was a unit specifically for deaf and hard of hearing clients. On staff were 4 professional advocates, all deaf, all women. They were native users of ASL. That means either they had deaf parents who used ASL as their primary language, or they had been in schools from a very early age that were ASL environments, or, what was least common, and often still is, had parents who could hear and learned ASL as soon as they knew their baby was deaf. These 4 women provided services to 175 deaf clients, and there was me, one interpreter. I was surprised they hired me. The 3-hour interview process included interpreting some phone calls with one of the deaf advocates, who was also the boss, calling various places, real places, with which she had real business. I had yet to acquire the skills used for phone interpreting, a particular challenge because the hearing person on the other end of the line can't see the interpreter or the deaf caller, and is often very confused. Phone conversations have norms embedded in them that us hearing people expect. Get an inexperienced interpreter on the call, and things can get a little out of whack. An inexperienced interpreter may get the timing off. It's a little bit like dancing with a partner who's off the beat. I was that partner, and people were hanging up on me. Even though I had a credential deeming me qualified to interpret in the state of Massachusetts, I did not have the skills and know-how to be effective when it came to this situation of phone interpreting. I thought I was definitely out of the running for the job after that, but they somehow saw the potential and were willing to invest the time and patience it would take to get me up to speed. I didn't get off to an illustrious start. My first day, that same boss, Joan Phillip, She and I went out to pick up some sandwiches from a local deli. We're walking down the sidewalk. She's sharing a story. I'm watching intently. And to my horror, she walked smack into a lamppost. After she stopped seeing stars, she looked at me and said, "That was your fault, you know." She went on to explain that in deaf culture, the norm is for the person not actively signing to be on the lookout for hazards for the one who's telling the tale. Curbs, light poles, oncoming cars, oncoming people. This was just one of the many lessons I have learned about the deaf way of being. Back at the agency, there was daily interaction with Social Security, WIC, public housing, vocational rehabilitation services. As someone who's been fortunate enough to never need public assistance, I had no idea how any of these systems worked. But I learned from these expert advocates. I also learned how systems can assist, but they can also impede progress to employment, education, and economic improvement. There were conversations with individuals, doctors, landlords, employers, lawyers, some of which were tremendously respectful and offered outstanding assistance. For example, there's an employer who, A, doesn't hesitate to interview a deaf applicant. There's often resistance to the very idea of interviewing a deaf applicant. There's anxiety about the unknown other, bias, preconceptions, misconceptions. It is a breath of fresh air when a deaf applicant is simply welcomed. B, they ask about how to manage communication, as he or she doesn't know sign language, recognizing their gap in knowledge of the language rather than framing this as a gap on the part of the deaf applicant. C, works with the applicant to hire the interpreter that has that famous know-how I mentioned earlier. Deaf people work with interpreters pretty much all their lives. They are usually well-versed in ascertaining if a given interpreter has the know-how for a given assignment. The employer who seeks the deaf person's advice on this earns a lot of respect. On the other hand, we hearing people can get so in the way. There's a doctor seeing a deaf patient about a significant health concern, who, even though I'm standing right there interpreting, starts the appointment with asking the deaf person if they can lip read. Perhaps, and perhaps not. No matter, it's a lot of guesswork, and this is a doctor's appointment. Let's not mess. Then they spend more of the precious appointment time trying to persuade the patient to get a cochlear implant. This is not why the patient's here. So again, back to the agency. I also learned about the diversity of the deaf community. Those 175 deaf and hard of hearing clients varied tremendously. There were deaf clients pursuing higher degrees. There were clients facing mental health issues, clients who had cognitive disabilities, learning disabilities, that were in financial crisis. There were those that had complete fluency in ASL, but little access to English. Now, this could be because they may have recently immigrated to the US and used their indigenous sign language, but had yet to learn ASL. They may have been poorly educated right here. The American public school systems often were and are unprepared to educate deaf children and youth. The result is a lack of access to the path to English literacy. Public schools rarely know to bring in deaf adult language models or to hire deaf teachers. They don't know to hire interpreters with tested and proven skills to work with these children. If the public school fails in these ways, the result can be a graduate with less than full literacy in either language, ASL or English. Soon after I started my job at the agency, the AIDS epidemic gained significant momentum. Suddenly, the work for me and for the advocates shifted focus to health awareness, medical advocacy, public outreach, and education for those serving the deaf community living with HIV. After about 2 years, I reluctantly left the agency for personal reasons. I successfully passed my national exams. I now had my driver's license. And I went into private practice. I went freelance. As a freelancer, I was one of a core group working with the deaf community as they faced HIV and AIDS in their world. We worked closely with each other as interpreters, with deaf professionals, and with the deaf people living with HIV as they worked to navigate the epidemic and the complexities of the healthcare and social systems. I would do this work for the next 7 years. I'm going to spend some time talking about this period of my life because how much it informed how I do my work and how I understand access and diversity. The epidemic was a war, and there were many battles. There was the deaf person prescribed various pharmaceutical cocktails to keep them alive. Over and over again, the T-cell count would reach 0 as their system developed immunity and the drugs lost their effectiveness. Just when it looked like there were no more options, the FDA would approve a new regime. They'd be put on the new protocol. I interpreted many of these medical appointments, clinical, and when things got worse, inpatient. But there wasn't just me. A few of us were identified by this deaf person as having the experience and the know-how and the ability to maintain their right to privacy. Our names and contact information was shared with physicians and with language service agencies. When it was time to schedule the next appointment, the patient worked with medical staff and the interpreter to select a date and time that worked for everyone. Several battles won. The battle for consistent medical and interpreting services won. The battle for patient-centered care and patient agency won. The battle for the approval of medical regimes. Well, the FDA dragged its feet a lot during this time. Delays cost lives, but approval did save some. For this person, the battle was won, barely in time. The battle for life won. There were times when the battle for life was lost. There was a deaf person living with HIV in a different geographic area with much the same health challenges as the previous person I discussed. However, there were many physicians and other professionals refusing to pay for interpreter services. Eventually, a professional deaf advocate started working with this person. After discussing with the deaf person about the interpreters that they thought would work well for them in this time of medical crisis, they brought me in to interpret. This was after the advocate had read the clinic the Riot Act about the American with Disabilities Act and legal compliance. The ADA passed in 1990. Yet it would take decades for people to make access part of daily operations and decision-making. The battle for language access was often lost. Sometimes it still is. But this advocate won the battle for access even back then. However, once the appointments had interpreting service, it quickly became evident that the previous appointments, where there had been no interpreter, had not gone well. The patient's health situation was only partially on record. Therefore, the suggested treatment plan was only partially on target and also only partially followed. Actual discussion had failed. Actual medical care had not been provided. Things improved once the advocate got involved, and interpreting services were consistent, but it was too late. They did not survive. I remember getting the call when they passed. I'd just been at the hospital interpreting an hour earlier. The deaf advocate and I had been there for over 24 hours. The situation was very complicated. The patient was in a coma. But things had settled down, and the advocate had sent me home to get some rest. And then the phone rang. The message delivered, and I cried. The memory still brings me to tears. Again, I tell the stories of this time to serve as a backdrop to what comes later. Keep in mind the collaboration, the degree of agency the deaf people had when battles were going in their favor, the idea of interpreter know-how and expertise, and the amount of experience deaf people have with interpreters. I'm now going to fast forward to 2013, the year I decided to embark on my journey on a PhD. At the time, I was working at the University of Virginia, providing interpreting and coordinating services for deaf and hard of hearing students, faculty, staff, and guests. As I started to examine what I would do for a dissertation topic, I had long conversations with one of the deaf faculty with whom I worked closely. I started with the idea of examining the role of creativity in interpretation, aiming to prove that interpreting was both an art and a science. My friend and colleague looked less than enthusiastic as I waxed eloquent on the topic. One day she said, "What has this got to do with us? Do something that matters to us." Well, that brought me up short. I forget how long I ruminated on her comment. I did completely revise my dissertation topic and research plan. I also invited her onto my dissertation committee, where she accepted. Like Nicole, she made sure I kept things real. As I mentioned, my work during the worst of the AIDS epidemic was a team effort. One of the primary goals was to work with deaf patients to ensure consistent, high-quality interpreting service. Deaf people selected us, then we and they worked together with doctors, support group leaders, and others to create and maintain consistent, high-quality interpreting service that then would create the opening for high-quality medical care and more. But times have changed since 1990. In 2013, I was hearing numerous stories about deaf people having their service decisions made for them by people who knew nothing of effective communication and consistency of service. And this was having a tremendous impact on access to healthcare and wellness. One deaf person, for example, shared this story about seeing their doctor about a medical concern. They were told an interpreter would be provided. The question was who? The deaf person attempted to give specific names of interpreters that, in their experience, were effective, who had the know-how. The medical facility responded saying that they had a contract with a specific interpreting service agency, and one of those interpreters would be sent. The request to get one of the interpreters the deaf patient identified as effective for this situation was denied. When the patient arrived at the appointment, an interpreter they had never met was there. During the discussion with the physician, it was clear that the interpreting service was ineffective. Communication between patient and doctor was failing, as questions were misrepresented and responses were nonsensical. The patient took out her phone. She typed, "Dismiss this interpreter. We will reschedule this appointment for another date and time." The deaf person's participation in the process of securing a qualified interpreter had been removed, and this was the result. Now, this person had well-honed self-advocacy skills. They eventually got the care they needed, but there was a great deal of unnecessary stress and frustration, delays, and wasted time. This was one of the many stories I was told. I'd found my research question: how did this happen? I had thought 23 years after the passage of the ADA, more battles were being won than being lost. How were deaf people losing the battle to participate in defining and securing what services best suited the situation at hand? The chain of events I'm about to describe is about how good intentions get lost in the fog. It focuses on the healthcare system and the legal system in the form of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Affordable Care Act. However, these events are an example. Whether it's the system of education, law, economics, government, employment, the systems damage the road. The systems surround us. We're all part of systems. And our actions and decisions made in the fog the systems produce can disrupt our good intentions. Now, this may all make more sense if we return to the story of healthcare, the ADA, and the Affordable Care Act. It is my hope that the example will serve as an illustration. The American with Disabilities Act creates a mandate in support of the principle of respect and equal opportunity for full participation in society. Definitely a good intention. It has mandated the provision of various accommodations that have opened doors to higher education, employment, and more. It is the first form of disability law to specifically, I always grew up saying specifically, and I still do it sometimes. It is the first form of disability law to specifically address communication access. Ways of providing this access are listed under the heading Auxiliary Aids and Services, and includes technology, tools, and various service providers. That's where they put ASL English interpreters. Things to note. The law speaks of need on the part of the person with a communication disability. There's no mention of language or culture. And the reality is that the patient and the provider do not have a language in common. Therefore, there is a need for an interpreter on the part of both parties. Another word besides need is the law's use of the word encourage. Title III of the ADA addresses healthcare facilities as well as other sites. These entities are encouraged to consult with the person with a disability to discuss what aid or service is appropriate. Encouraged is not a mandate, it's an option. And one that could leave the deaf person out of the discussion of what actually works best. Now, you might think, why isn't a healthcare center discussing with the deaf person how best to interact? Good question. Hang on to that question. But we can see that the road of good intentions on which the ADA was based is developing some potholes. Now let's look at the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010. As a law, it creates a mandate in support of the principle of equitable access to wellness and health care. A good intention. The result is a significant increase in people covered by Medicare and Medicaid. Since the passage of the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid and Medicare reimbursements make up over 50% of revenue for many healthcare facilities. To get these federal dollars, healthcare entities must prove compliance with various laws like the ADA. Lack of compliance leads to significant financial penalties. Medicaid and Medicare has developed the Physician Quality Reporting System, which is designed to measure what it says, the quality of patient care. The system collects data that results in a score. The score is then used to determine the amount of reimbursement for services provided to medical facilities serving Medicaid and Medicare patients. Now let's look what happens as a result. The interpreter's work has become a means to boost a score. They count numbers of patients served. You know, like back in the day when McDonald's would pass how many burgers sold? Those numbers are used to provide evidence of effectiveness in the form of legal compliance and not necessarily of effectiveness of communication. Interpreters have become a commodity and a tool for gathering and protecting revenue. It's also become a system of plug and play. A deaf person goes to make an appointment. They inform the clinic that they will need an interpreter. The clinic says they'll take care of it. Sound familiar? The clinic contacts an agency that provides interpreters. The agency looks at a master list of interpreters and plugs one in for the appointment. Throughout all of this process, the deaf person is often completely removed. It's gone. And the irony is, you know that deaf person who dismissed the interpreter and had to reschedule? Numerically speaking, now, that shows on a report as 2 counts of service provided, increasing the score. Now, you may have a better idea of that answer to the question I asked you to hold. Why isn't the healthcare center discussing with deaf people how best to interact? Bottom line, the quality of communication access and the quality of doctor-patient interaction has gotten lost in the fog. The road to inclusion and access is pretty torn up at this point. Now, there are people in systems, in hospitals, in language service agencies, in schools, and in courtrooms who somehow manage to avoid that fog. They manage to preserve their good intentions and maintain the road. But it sure is easy to get lost in the fog. My road to this place I stand today has been paved with good intentions. And there have been more than a few times I've had to repave. As a matter of fact, I had to repave the way to this talk today. You see, typically after a Lyceum talk, there is a lunch with the committee and the presenter. I told Nicole about it and made it pretty clear there was no need for her to attend, that it was meant for the presenter. Nicole said whatever I decided was fine. She handled it with great grace. We ended the call. I felt icky because I'd made a mistake. I speak about including deaf people in the conversation, and I had just excluded her. I let myself get foggy. So I cleared my head, and I went to Eric. I said that Nicole needed to come to the lunch. I'm quite sure there'll be questions here and at lunch that she would be best to answer. You see, I'm still learning. On a larger scale, we often have our good intentions impacted by larger systems that invisibly reform our road from good intentions to potholes. Raising our awareness of this reality means putting people before protocol. It means asking and actually listening to the answer. Justina Miles, a deaf performance artist, authored an article in which she said, let's look at accommodation as a step closer to unity. And unity can be best achieved once we are out of the fog. Ms. Miles' article went on to say, our identity as deaf people is existential and important. Our languages enrich the world. Our history runs deep. We are thunderous. We produce change makers. We are a powerful community, both resilient and brilliant. I don't know who I would be today without my 30-plus years of working with deaf people. I know I have a richer, more robust, and fascinating life because of this community. I've had the opportunity to examine my personal values, to be a lifelong learner, and maybe to do some good along the way. I cannot imagine a world without this community. So let's celebrate the brilliance and work with them to pave the road. I thank you for your time.
Wow, Laurie, wow. Wow. I'm sure all of you are feeling so inspired by what we just heard. Thank you. We are going to take some questions from the audience. So if you've already written some down, please feel free to pass those up, but you have a moment now because I'm going to ask the first question. Yep, so this person walking around right here will collect cards if you've already written.
He hasn't written the question down yet, if you give him a moment. He hasn't written his question down yet.
There are some cards in the back. Some folks have written them down, but take your time. Question for you, Laurie. Today, you really gave this example of hearing people to ask, how can we support? How can we give back to the deaf community? But my question is, how can we as a deaf community give back to you?
I forgot what language I was using, so sorry. I'll let you know that she forewarned me about this question, and I'm so grateful, because I was like, wow, that's such a fabulous question. And the thing is, deaf people have already given so much. I wouldn't know this language. I would not have my career. I would not be able to look out at this audience and see deaf community members without them. Deaf people are constantly in support of us as interpreters, as long as we show up as open. And for that, I'm always grateful. I'm always having to ask the community to help my students with learning the language, with learning how to interpret. I invite them to events like this, and they show up. And that's the biggest gift of all.
You are a gift to us, Laurie. Well, thank you. There are a few cards that have come up to the front, so we can read it at the same time, if that works. So how can we, as humans, improve communication? And with our good intentions, and arrive at solutions? What does that look like? Oh, who's going to answer that one?
Okay, we're going to split this answer. I'm going to start. I think the most important thing I know I do is, first of all, admit I don't know, which, believe me, from my cultural background is a biggie. I come from a background in which you're not supposed to admit you don't know. So admit you don't know. And then the other thing is admit when you get it wrong. I think those two things open a way to have an authentic conversation about how to solve things.
That's great. I'll add to that as well. We as a deaf community really do not appreciate it when we're pushed to the side. It's a lot of work for hearing people to go, oh, I don't want to write it down back and forth with you. That's too much work. That's too much work. You don't want to gesture. You don't want to try. Try. Please try anything can make our interactions work. This question is specific for me. Let's see. So suppose there is the most amount of money in the world. What actions do you think we would take? What would the deaf community want? Thank you so much. I have 2 interpreters on the stage to support with written English. Thank you so much. So if someone were to cover all of the bills, what kind of drama production would I want to bring to the deaf and hard of hearing community? What theater piece would I bring?
We're just having the question repeated. It's rather a complex one, so just one moment.
So if all of the bills were covered, every dollar sign taken care of, what would we bring to the deaf community? Having it interpreted a bunch of different ways. Thank you, everyone. I want to make sure it's clear. I've been involved in theater all my life, mostly with other hearing peers. But in college, I was involved in theater where everything was equal access. Our director, our stage manager, all of the actors. We did something called shadow interpreting. We had the deaf actor and an interpreter assigned to each deaf actor right next to them, speaking all of the lines with them so that everything was clear. We had audience members who were deaf. We had audience members who were hearing. I mean, I don't know what specific show, I'm not remembering exactly, but the important thing was access. It does not matter what production you pick. Access is there. That's what theater is, bringing a group together to enjoy it. I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure who did, if you'd like to add to that, or I don't see anyone, so great. It's a really good one. We should both answer this. How can we bring these people to the table? Hospitals, schools, when we're talking about language access. How do we prioritize patients? Like, how do we change the protocol? These systems at work. How can we really step in and say, no, this is what works? Is there a way to do that, Laurie? What do you think? Was that clear, or did I get that question correct? Great, thank you.
Wendy keeps saying, remember to speak English. You're like, great. Yeah. I do want to take just a moment to thank the interpreters, Joel O'Leary and Wendy Watson, who have done extraordinary work today, including reminding me what language I'm using. Wendy came up all the way from Cape Cod to do this, so I really am grateful for that. I have always found the best thing is when there's some kind of either committee or advisory board or something that is at best majority deaf people participating. So the actual people are there at the table. I don't care if it's legislation or how a company's going to handle a job interview. Bring the people to the table.
Absolutely, I agree. As you must know, I'm a very visual person. To get a deaf person's attention is often a hand wave, like, yoo-hoo, I'd like to tell you something. So these fans that are going on along the room, I'm like, who needs me? Who needs me? This question says, are there any suggestions you can think of to improve the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act? Oh, I have so many. We'd be here forever. We're limited in time, but I would say talk to us. Like, it's, whoever put these words on paper, I don't believe there was a deaf person at the table. So talk to us, ask us.
And the law's been around now. How long? It's a long time. But I always, when I teach interpreters about encouraging people to comply with the law, I say use the law as your last card in your deck. Learn to negotiate with people in ways that they can understand. Like, let's look at a doctor. I'm pretty sure, doctor, you want your patient to be able to clearly talk about their symptoms, and therefore that you can clearly convey a treatment plan. So therefore, you don't go to, you're out of legal compliance until you have gotten a lot of pushback, because you don't win. Then you're threatening them. Okay? So I'll go there if I have to, but I try and wait and try and get to their better part of them to hear me. Remember I said, listen to the people, ask the questions, listen to the answer. If I can get them to that space where they're listening to the answer, it works.
Great example of that. You saw the interpreter had her hands up a little bit longer than, these are different languages we're working with here. English and ASL are not the same grammatical structures. So as you can see, it's just an example of give time, build in that extra time for communication access. We have time for one more question. Let's pick. Language deprivation syndrome. It comes up often in our community. It is an actual diagnosis. Children who are exposed to language from a very young age have access to language. So how can we change this for our deaf and hearing loss communities? You know, talking about families learning sign language, cochlear implants, all of that.
Yeah. This is a huge question. Again, that could be a whole talk unto itself. What I try and do, I can always speak to what I do, is if there is an appropriate place for me to say or do something, I do. For example, just last week I was contacted by Peterborough, what was the agency? I think it was a job site agency specifically for schools, any kind of professional. And they were looking for an interpreter for a deaf student who was about to start in the local school system. And I thought, ruh-roh. Who is this agency? What are they doing? Do they know anything about the local resources, et cetera, et cetera? So I had no intention of taking this job. I have a job. So as a person with expertise, not as an interpreter, I called the special education director and left the information. I met today a retired teacher of the deaf who lives nearby. I'm like, hi, nice to meet you. Do you want to help me advise the school system? You know, I was told long ago about the theory of chickens pecking at a wall. There's many of us with our beaks out pecking at the wall. Somebody's beak is going to break through. We don't know who, and we don't know when, and it doesn't matter as long as someone breaks through.
I love that, yeah, and to add, for our New Hampshire Deaf and Hard of Hearing organization, Northeast Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services, I have a lot of roles within the state. I do a lot. But we have a program called Family Sign Language Program. So a hearing family who does not yet know sign language has a child born deaf or hard of hearing. We teach them through many, many weeks of this course how to communicate their needs within their home with their deaf and hard of hearing children. Just like me, my parents are not deaf, but they learned sign. We had access in my home from the very beginning. So it's another part of giving back to the community through this role of Family Sign Language Program. With social media these days, my goodness, everything is available. Awareness is there. The options are there. It's a wonderful thing. But at the same time, we need to encourage those hearing parents. Look how important communication is. New Hampshire might be a little bit behind the 8 ball on that, but we are here fighting it and making it happen. That concludes our question and answer. Wonderful job, Laurie. We are all sweating up here, so wonderful job. Thank you so much for what you brought to us today. I hope everyone here enjoyed this summer series. I hope you enjoyed my poetic expression, the lecture. I feel like they really paralleled each other beautifully. Wonderful job. So if you would like to see the future events of this summer series, next week, Peter Zulin is going to be talking about how my life went to the dogs. So there will be food provided, there will be to the door to my right, so thank you. It's written down, but I'm like, which way are we actually going here? Out that door where the exit sign is there will be some light snacking and be able to meet with the presenters here today. We appreciate your patience in the heat. Keep cool. Wonderful job. Thank you, interpreters.